Winter squash are so fun to grow and are such great food to eat in the winter. You know, winter squash can be direct sown in the garden, or if you're really careful, you can start your winter squash in the house and get a jump start on the season. This is really important to those of us that have a super short growing season. So we want to hedge our bets to get the winter squash to mature before the first fall hard freeze. So today I'd like to share with you how I start my winter squash seeds and what varieties of winter squash that I like to grow. You know, this planting method, it's going to work for all winter squash varieties. So winter squash comes in many different colors and shapes. So the varieties that I like to grow are Waltham butternut, spaghetti squash, delicata, autumn delight acorn, and sunshine kabocha. So we have a really short growing season, and I need to get the winter squash plants started in the house early to get mature winter squash before we get our first fall frost. So I cover the winter squash plants with a frost blanket in the fall to help protect the winter squash from the hard freezes that come in the fall. The other reason that I like to start the seeds in the house is because the mice will dig up my seeds in the garden. So if I start the seeds in the house, the mice will leave the plants alone when I plant them in the garden. So winter squash is very fussy about being transplanted. So we have a very specific method to growing winter squash in the house to get an early start. Here's my 5-step process to growing and transplanting winter squash. All right, number 1 is start time. It's important to start the plants at the right time. Too early and they will get leggy and weak, and too late and you may not get a crop. So the start time is going to vary depending on your growing zone. So look up your last average frost date and then count back 4 weeks. For example, my last average frost date is May 15th. 4 weeks back will be around April 15th. This is when I start my winter squash seeds. All right, number 2, planting the seeds. First, we need to decide how many winter squash that we want. Then we can figure out how many seeds to plant. So each winter squash vine should produce about 2 winter squash. So I will plant 4 winter squash seeds in a 3-inch pot. What I'm creating here is called a hill, and a hill is usually 3 to 5 plants planted together. If 2 seeds out of the 4 seeds that you planted in each pot produce 2 winter squash, then each pot is equal to 4 winter squash. Now the reason that I want to sow so many seeds is that things can happen to your seedlings along the way, and I want to be sure that I get enough winter squash plants to put in the ground. Now if I got extra plants, I can give some away, so that's not a problem. But I can never get back the time if I don't plant enough seed. So by putting 4 seeds per pot and expecting 2 to come up, we are hedging our bets towards getting the number of winter squash that we want. So for example, I grow 20 butternut winter squash for late winter eating, and therefore I will put in 5 pots of butternut squash seed with 4 seeds per pot. This will give me at least 20 butternut squash. And I'll do the same calculation for the other types of winter squash that I want to grow. And you can do this too. It'll give you a general idea of how many pots of winter squash you will want to plant. All right, here's how I plant the winter squash. In the bottom of a pot, I put in a 1/2 inch of compost. So this will give the roots a place to get nutrients when they reach the bottom of the pot. Then I fill the pot with seedling starter mix. The reason we want to use a seedling starter mix is because some seeds are sensitive to fertilizers and will not germinate if there's fertilizer in the soil. So it's safer to start all your seeds in a seedling starter mix. So I plant mine in my family secret seedling soil mix, and I will make our family secret seedling soil mix recipe available to you. I'll put a link in the description below. Now, if you want to buy a pre-made mix, I would use the Seed Starter Natural Potting Soil Mix. It's made in the USA, and it's what the professional growers use. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to find that. Next, place 4 winter squash seeds on top of the seedling mix. Push the seeds in the soil a 1/2 inch deep, and then push the soil over the seeds. Label the pot and then water it in well. Place the pot in a warm place between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the seeds should germinate in, say, 5 to 7 days. Now I like to use a heat mat to keep the soil warm, and the brand I like is Spider Farmer, and I'll include a link below if you want to check that out. Number 3, grow the winter squash plants with a minimum of 12 hours of light and keep the night temperatures above 60 degrees. So the winter squash plants will stay in their pots until they are ready to go out into the garden. We will not transplant them to another pot. And they will want lots of light to keep them from being leggy. So try to rely more on the plants being outside for their light than having them under the grow lights. And it's important to harden off your plants so they don't get sunburned. All right, so number 4 is hardening off. You can start to harden off your winter squash as soon as they emerge from the soil. So you want to put your winter squash plants outside during the day and back inside at night. So you want to start the plants with a few hours of sunlight and then back to shade. Add an hour more sunlight a day until they can be outside in the full sunlight all day long with the temperatures above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So you want to keep the plants moist as you are hardening them off to be outside. All right, number 5, once you are on your average last frost date, check your 10-day forecast. If there are no freezing nights, you can plant your winter squash plants outside. So you want to dig a hole in your garden that is about 3 inches wide and about 4 inches deep. And you'll want to carefully turn the pot upside down and get the entire root ball out of the pot intact. Then carefully turn the root ball over and place the whole root ball with the plant still together in the hole. You want to push the soil back around the root ball and water it in thoroughly. Now, if you have not hardened off your seedlings, you will need to do it now. To harden off the planted squash, place a frost blanket over the plants to give them shade. Remove the blanket for 1 hour the first day, and then 2 hours the next day, and so on until you can have the cover off for the whole day. You can also put the frost blanket on at night if the temperatures are below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And if a storm is going to come through and freeze the plants, I would cover them with a frost blanket. So there's a link in the description below for you to get the proper frost blanket for your garden. Now, if you'd like to learn 3 low-tech frost protection systems for tomatoes and frost tender seedlings, you can check out our video. I will put the link in the description below. Now, if you want to see us grow winter squash vertically in the garden, you can jump into our High Performance Garden Show. There are over 300 episodes for you to learn from, and it's free and it's online. And you can find it at thelivingfarm.org/high-performance-garden-show or click on the link below.